Part 25. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 241. It's so cool to go out with a big boss. Greet sat on the phantom horse and looked around, very happy. Archmage Sam summoned 3 phantom ponies at one go, one for himself, one for Gretel, and one for Aurora, and led them straight to the capture location. The necromancer's bone horse was still despised after all. The phantom pony can run faster than an ordinary horse and run more steadily than an ordinary horse. Stepping on water is like stepping on flat ground, stepping on swamp is like stepping on flat ground, and stepping on air is like stepping on flat ground. There are no detours, and there are very few turns. Greet's equestrian skills are so bad that even sitting on the back of the phantom pony doesn't feel difficult. Well, the only regret is that because of his weight, the barbarian was still left in the laboratory for housekeeping and was not taken away. The advantage of their fast horses and walking in a straight line was that it only took them about an hour to reach the location of the teleportation array. The island was crowded with people, at least 20 or 30 cavalry were crowded together, and there was a circle of people on the lake shore. Gretel rushed to the shore as soon as he landed. Where did that guy get into the water? Where did he get ashore? Get out of the way. The leading knight looked at him, then at the high-level mage behind him, and silently pointed him to a place. Greet immediately jumped down, shoveled the soil, prepared a dilution, and did bacterial culture. He took a water sample, diluted it, and did bacterial culture. After a quick operation, spell casting, dyeing, and microscopic examination, Greet looked at the picture under the microscope and felt like crying. Vibrio cholerae, Bacillus anthracis, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, Bacillus tetanus, Staphylococcus aureus, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, this guy has everything on his body. I regretted that I should have activated that birth spell during the battle. Now it's fine, I got it from that guy and spread it all the way here. Oluo. Wash the floor with disinfectant. Wash everything on the island and around the lake. Throw bleaching powder into the lake. How much? Throw 2.5 grams into 1 cubic meter of lake water. You calculate it yourself. Master, please give the order immediately. Everyone wash their hands and change clothes as soon as possible, and you are not allowed to drink the raw water in the lake, you must boil it before drinking. Is it that serious? Old Sam frowned slightly. On the other side, Aurora Warden had already shouted. Boss, not enough bleach. Spread the top layer first. Spread it all the way to where that guy swam. Save some time, disinfect everything on the way that guy escapes. How much bleaching powder does this require? Aurora screamed. In any case, Gretel's order was quickly passed on. The cavalry had the lowest status. For the sake of the high-level mages, they obeyed the orders obediently even if they found it troublesome, and lined up to wash their hands one after another. The magicians who came to work were not so obedient. The 2 great magicians concentrated on studying the patterns on the stone slab, and turned a deaf ear to Gretel's request. Hand washing. What is that? With the teacher taking the lead, their disciples ignored Gretel even more. A 7th-level mage of the conjuration system came with the teacher to help him, and even complained to his companions in front of Gretel. This is too annoying. In the middle of work, you drag people to wash their hands. No time, no time, no time. You also ask us not to drink the lake water. Are you kidding me? Who drinks the lake water? Who can't make some? It's water. Gretel pretended not to hear. As a doctor, it has become a habit for him to be scolded by patients, family members, superiors, and leaders. These few complaints cannot break his defenses at all. He just took samples, took samples, took samples, took samples. Soon, the results of the bacterial culture on the island also appeared. Extensive bacterial contamination. Basically all the bacteria found on the outer edge of the lake were detected. These people can really walk shoes stained with bacteria have stepped on the entire island, right? Give me a step, give me a step, give me a step. Let's spray disinfectant. Aurora held the sterilizing bucket in one hand, held by a floating saucer, rolled up the water mist with magic in one hand, and walked over the long grass step by step. The mage from the conjuration department simply set up a force field wall. Go away. Don't interrupt our work. The opponent is level 7. Aurora level 5. Gretel is level 3 as a priest and level 2 as a mage. Although a 4th level arcanist is approximately equal to a 7th level or 8th level magician, on this occasion, there is no advantage to be gained. Gretel turned to look at the great magician Sam. The great magician is frowning. Is it necessary to make such a big noise? The floor must be washed wherever that person passes. Little Greet, have you ever thought about how much this costs? Dozens of high-level and mid-level magicians are working on this matter day and night. On the 375th floor of the Babel Tower, 4 laboratories are lined up, all occupied. It was the legendary mage who nodded. Yes, those laboratories were resources under the name of the legendary mage. But those are also the resources of the Parliament. In comparison, those refined salt, lime, distilled water, etc. are nothing at all. Gretel sighed. If this was in a previous life, how could he still argue that it's really necessary? The CDC has gone out with all its strength, and eradication, isolation, and circulation have all started. But here, he still has to find a way to prove. Master, it's really necessary, he sighed helplessly. If I have enough time, I can conduct experiments on animals to prove the danger of the spread of the plague. But what I am short of now is time. The shortest incubation period of cholera is only a few hours, anthrax is only a few hours, and the shortest incubation period of diphtheria is 1 day. It has been 36 hours since the thief escaped. If you are not lucky, it will start to spread somewhere. No matter how short an animal experiment is, it only takes a day or 2. They can't afford to wait. Master, please do me a favor again. Gretel bowed deeply. Take me along the guy's escape route. Villages, towns, and places where people live must be disinfected first. I hope it's not too late. Old Sam's thick brown eyebrows knitted together. He thought about the excitement of the necromancer, and the horror of the judging committee member of the prophecy department, and finally sighed. Okay, I'll trust you again. Someone will lead the way. Someone from the prophecy department, who knows the tracer technique, will take us all the way there. The great magician and the gentleman of the jury opened his mouth, but at least he could still call people. Soon, 4 phantom horses lined up. The leading prophecy magician threw out a green light, pointed forward and said, "Follow the stream." That guy came down along the stream. The phantom pony goes straight up the stream. It didn't take long for them to reach the village at the foot of the mountain. Old Sam took the lead, jumped off the horse and looked around. How is the situation? Gretel's expression has changed. He rushed into the first farmhouse and sniffed hard, and the room was filled with a stench. Then he rushed to the second farmhouse, and the stench was still there. He turned around twice and found the manure pit in the corner of the village. Before he got close, I saw patches of watery feces on the ground. Send the signal immediately. He turned around like the wind, ran straight over, and braked in 3 steps in front of old Sam. Assemble priests. Seal the villages. The plague has broken out. It's cholera. Thank you for your warmth during the collapse, and at Dark Night Soul Lamp for the 500 starting coins. Thanks to Wanning for the 100 starting coins. Very tired, very tired. This morning's chapter only has 2,000 words. I will make up for the extra updates in the evening. Please subscribe, please give me monthly tickets, please recommend votes, please give book reviews. Asking for various. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 242. Chapter 242 Cholera? It's not particularly difficult actually, wait. Night Dream Bing 10,000 rewards plus update 3. It's cholera, or in other words, the epidemic that broke out in this small village is most likely cholera. Although he hasn't done a bacterial microscopy yet, the rice swill-like feces on the ground has given him enough information. There is a high probability, more than 90%, that it is cholera. Greet was nervous and at the same time inexplicably relieved. Naturally, people are nervous. The famous class A infectious disease, besides plague, is cholera. He has not yet isolated and purified Yersinia pestis, and the most terrifying infectious disease outbreak he may face now is cholera. Yet the relief is genuine. If the outbreak was anthrax, he would not only return to the laboratory immediately and gamble that penicillin could be produced from the liver as soon as possible, but the only other option would be to summon the priest. If it's tetanus, tetanus is not transmitted from person to person, but it's harder to get a tetanus vaccine within a few days than it is to gamble on penicillin. If it's botulism, that victory or defeat is a common thing in military affairs. Young hero, please try again. Fortunately it was cholera. Cholera is a disease that has an acute onset, severe symptoms, and spreads quickly. From every aspect, it is worthy of the title of Category A, however, as long as it is blocked at the source. Gretel looked around and ran towards the tallest and largest farmhouse. From the outer walls to the roof to the floor, this farmhouse is all made of logs. The bark on the outer walls has not been peeled off. It can be said to be extremely rough. One can imagine the muscles of a person who can build such a house. After Gretel pushed the door open, he bumped into a giant man and almost flew out. Ayo! Who? Gretel's back hit the door frame and he groaned. The pain was so painful that he could hardly speak. Wow, he shouldn't not take Bernard with him. He must find a way to take the barbarian with him in the future. The giant man didn't even sway. Big palm-like hands lifted his shoulders, turned him to the side, carried him to the door, and looked at him under the light. Little mage? What are you doing here? Gretel bared his teeth and rubbed his back with his backhand. After rubbing it twice, I finally breathed. Where is the chief of your village? There is a plague in the village. Many people are sick. I am a healer and I am here to help you. Patient. The giant man was doubtful. He took 2 steps forward and bent down to look. Gretel felt his eyes darken, and a large shadow fell over his head, covering him from head to toe. He instinctively leaned up and took a step back. The giant man seemed to notice something, stood up straight, and squatted down. Little mage. Gretel. Oops, I didn't bring the oak staff. But what I need now is the identity of a priest. He looked left and right, trying to find a witness to prove for himself, and suddenly took 2 steps sideways. He stretched out his right hand and pressed it on a cluster of moss outside the wooden house, praying silently in his heart. Grow it out. Grow it out. Grow it out quickly. He has never succeeded before. His birth-inducing magic, apart from holding seeds to induce the growth of tubes, is also useful against bacteria. But this time, please succeed. Whether it's moss, fungus, or grass seeds that happen to blow onto the wall, please give me some respect. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. There was something soft and fuzzy under the palm of his hand. Greet let go of his hand, and a bright yellow mushroom appeared out of nowhere, appearing on the rough bark of the log. The giant man was moved. He took another step back, and in a much more respectful manner than before, he stroked his chest and saluted Gretel. Master Priest. Stop saluting. Call someone to help. Gretel stamped his feet. The giant man stood up straight, turned around and shouted. Burton! Og! Come out quickly! The priest is looking for you. 2 more men came out of the wooden house. The same tall figure, the same messy brown hair, the same beard. The 3 of them stood side by side. Gretel thought he had stabbed a bear in the den, and couldn't help but take another step back. The giant man who came out first squatted down and spoke as softly as possible. Master priest, what do you want us to do? Please call everyone over. A plague has broken out in your village. I, and the 3 mages, are here to help you. Let me take a look at your situation and then treat you. The 3 giant men began to run separately, roaring. The roar shook the village, and soon everyone who was still in the village was dragged over. Most of them walked here by themselves, and a small half were supported by others, or simply carried. What's going on? I just chopped half of the wood. I'm making a chicken coop. I'm still mending clothes. I'm fine, isn't it just diarrhea? Ouch, I have a stomachache, can you let me finish my bowel movements first and then come again? There were a lot of complaints in the village. However, when the 3rd, 5th, or 10th person with diarrhea appeared, the sound quickly became smaller and smaller. Finally, the giant man stood at the door with a straight face. Shut up. The Reverend is here to help us. Reverend, please speak. Gretel emerged from behind him. After just one glance, I felt a lot more relaxed. There was no such thing as vomiting and diarrhea on the spot, unable to walk even after diarrhea, wrinkled skin and sunken eye sockets, showing obvious signs of dehydration. When he was seriously dehydrated, he could either resign himself to his fate, or he could only take a gamble with his healing skills. Feeling relieved, Greet immediately showed a gentle smile. Stretch out your arms and spread them to both sides. Hello everyone, I am a servant of the God of Nature, and I am here to help you. Until now, if you have diarrhea, vomiting, or other discomforts, please come to my left. If you are not feeling well, please come to my left. Right hand side. Dozens of farmers and village women looked at each other, then slowly began to move. After being roared by the giant man several times, his movements finally became a little faster, from the speed of a snail to the speed of a turtle. Gretel didn't rush him. After waiting patiently for a minute or two, 15 or 6 people were already standing on the left side. More men than women, more adults than children. Gretel silently counted the number of people and compared it with the textbook in his memory, and he became more confident. In one village, 1/3 of the population fell ill. There is no doubt that this is a plague. A series of exclamations sounded. In the queue of patients, an old woman with a sallow complexion staggered and fell down. More voices screamed. To the right of the old woman, a young woman with a haggard face struggled to raise her arms to support the old woman's body, but suddenly her face turned pale and she squatted down holding her belly. Gretel immediately walked towards them. As he walked, he raised his voice. Don't worry, I'm here. But I can't handle it all by myself, and one person's healing skills can't cure so many people, so please everyone listen to my guidance. As long as everyone follows the arrangements, everyone will be fine, and everything will be fine. He directed the patients to gather into the room. I stood at the door and looked at each one. I visually checked that there were no critically ill patients, so I turned around and grabbed the strong man at the beginning. Listen. This plague is caused by eating or drinking unclean things. I don't know where it is unclean now, and I don't have time to find it. You tell them all not to drink raw water. Everything you eat and drink must be cooked before entering your mouth. Wash your hands before eating or after going to the toilet. Wash your hands with soap. 2 large chunks of soap crashed over. It's very hard and rough. Greet made it himself in the laboratory when he had nothing to do. His craftsmanship was mediocre, and his appearance was hard to describe. However, the strong man felt like he had found a treasure. He held it in both hands and bent down to take it respectfully. By the way, is there anyone who hasn't come back yet? Also, Old Barry, Fitch, little Flora. Go find them. Send the healthy ones to go find them. I want to see everyone here before I'm done. Gretel turned around and entered the house. Listening to the strong man's roar outside, Gretel took out a pen and paper and smiled as friendly as possible. He walked along the row of floors in the house, asking and diagnosing one by one. Grandma, how old are you? How many times have you had diarrhea since yesterday? When was the first time? Have you ever vomited? Does your stomach hurt now? Stretch out your hand, I'll take a look at your fingers. Have you ever urinated? Without asking a word, the old woman bent over and started vomiting. Greet hurriedly helped her, paying attention to the color and shape of the vomit while helping her. He was too busy to pay attention to the dirt on her body. After struggling for a while, the vomiting finally subsided temporarily. The old lady was exhausted and collapsed on the floor. The young woman knelt beside her and wiped the floor with a rag. After wiping it a few times, his face turned pale, he turned around and ran out. Gretel couldn't care less about her. While inquiring and inspecting, he kept recording. Elderly female patient, 55 years old, forget it, she is considered old in this world. I had diarrhea 5 times from early this morning to now. First, I passed yellowish-brown loose stools, and then I passed rice-watery stools. I had projectile vomiting after the last 2 times of diarrhea. The skin and mucous membranes are dry, and there are no sunken eye sockets. He is still not sure about the eye sockets of Waiguo Ren. His voice is slightly hoarse, his urine output is normal, his pulse is normal. This is basically considered mild dehydration, moderate at most. Greet quickly made a diagnosis and comforted softly. Grandma, you are not seriously ill now. Just have a good rest and drink more water. Oro. Come and watch them boil water. Aurora, all-purpose tool man, disinfectant sprinkler, and Master Warden rushed over. Gretel issued a series of instructions. Ask someone to boil water. Boil water. It must be boiled. After boiling, immediately cool it down enough to drink, then add sugar and salt. A bag of white sugar, a bag of refined table salt, and a bag of baking soda were thrown at Aurora's feet with a few bangs. Greet tore off a page of paper, recorded it while doing mental calculations, made a few strokes, and after writing the configuration ratio, handed it to him. After finishing the preparation, pour water for each patient, put it in a bowl or cup and put it next to them. Each person has 750 ml. You have to drink 1 round every hour. Quick, go to the fever immediately. When I finish diagnosing the last patient, to see the first patient drink water. Yes, although cholera is a serious disease, when you are mildly dehydrated or even moderately dehydrated, the only way to treat it is to rehydrate. If you can take oral rehydration, take it. If you can't take it, give it intravenously. Replenish fluids, replenish ions, replenish energy, and help the patient push through. With early detection, early intervention, and timely rehydration, the vast majority of patients can survive. Add salt to the distilled water, add glucose. If there is no glucose, use white sugar to top it, add sodium bicarbonate, add potassium chloride. The last one is not great. I can only hope that there will be some impurities in the salt. Remember to make chlorine later. Potash. Be sure to remember. No problem. Aurora turned around and ran away. Greet turned around. The old woman was dying, and she struggled to pull his sleeves. Master Priest, I'm sorry for staining your robe, let Flora wash it for you later. Although this child is small, his hands and feet are very diligent. Flora. Flora. Grandma, Flora went to herd the sheep. The young woman whispered. She didn't mind the dirt on the old man's body either. With tears in her eyes, she held the old man's sleeve with one hand and pulled Greed with the other. Master Pastor, will Grandma die? The god of nature will bless her. Gretel tried to comfort her. Do not touch me. Leave me alone. I brought this piece of clothing. It would be better to reduce cross-infection. Yet he still has to keep smiling. Ma'am, are you feeling uncomfortable too? Let me show you. Gretel's consultation was very fast. It takes less than 3 minutes to consult, bring medical records, and see a patient. After a round of inspection, 5 or 6 more patients were admitted to the big wooden house, and the first old woman had already picked up the earthenware bowl and began to drink the sugar-salt water that Aurora poured for her. Boss. I'm done. What else is there to do? You go find a big wooden barrel. Greed calculated in his mind and realized that he still had to intervene in matters such as washing hands, and could not let the villagers do what they wanted. Whether you use a water tank or a water ladle, cross-infection can occur every minute. On one side, he worked hard to see the doctor, and on the other side, a large bucket of water was quickly delivered. Greed directed people to deliver the bucket to the toilet door, took out the bell, and recited in a low voice. Time is money, my friend. The gremlin responded. Gretel gave him a gold coin and, racing against time, began to issue orders. Gold coins, you drill a hole in the wall of the barrel near the bottom, and then connect the faucet. The valve that opens the faucet should be like this. In a few words and together with drawings, he sketched out what he wanted. A spare piece of iron was thrown out, and the little monster stretched his hands forward. The iron piece melted, deformed, and solidified silently in the light. When the light disappeared, the foot-operated faucet that Gretel wanted was already firmly attached to the wall of the barrel. It should be fine. Have people fill it with water, throw in bleaching powder, disinfect it and then use it to wash hands. We'll go see the patients later, disinfect them, etc., and let Aurora go. Gretel thought to himself. Before I could finish my breath, there was sudden chaos in the wooden house, with more than a dozen voices shouting at the same time. Master Priest! Master Priest! I am coming! Gretel flew away. In the center of the wooden house, a huge man was sitting on his knees. I don't know whether he was called Burton or Og, with his arms stretched out, holding a limp little girl. The girl's bright red hair hangs down as if withered, her lips are dry, her eyes are sunken, and her plump cheeks are already somewhat shriveled. When I lifted my palm, I saw that the fingerprints were obviously wrinkled. MD. It was at least moderately dehydrated, and it had even begun to develop into severe dehydration. When it has developed to this extent, just replenishing fluids is no longer enough. There are a lot of dangers. The old woman who was the first to be treated by Gretel, and the young woman next to her, were anxiously beside the little girl. Seeing Gretel come in, the two of them raised their heads together and almost rushed over to hug his thigh. Master Priest! Save little Flora! Save her! Stanny died in the war last year. She is the only child left in our family. 4,200 words. An additional update has been completed. Yeah. Typhoon fireworks are coming soon, shivering. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, please review books. There are 8 days until the end of the month, and there are still 200 votes left to break the 1,000 mark. The author also wants to break the 1,000 mark once. I heard there is some lottery opportunity. Put your palms together, me. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 243. Gretel's heart beat wildly. The disease he is facing now is in the mild stage, and all he needs to do is instill sugar saline, or the oral rehydration salt recommended by the WHO mixed with water. Moderate dehydration may require intravenous rehydration, but when it comes to severe dehydration, muscle cramps, hypokalemia, uremia, acidosis, circulatory failure, acute renal failure, acute pulmonary edema. Which one is easy to deal with? If he were in the emergency department, he would have already yelled, "Check blood gases urgently." Ions. Creatinine. Open intravenous access. Infusion. By the way, he would also need to prepare hydrocortisone, dexamethasone, isoproterenol, or dopamine. Maintain blood pressure at the shock level, etc. But he has nothing on hand now. There is no blood gas analyzer, no ion detector, no injection needle. Even if he can get the little monster to get the injection needle immediately, and immediately sterilize it with high temperature and high pressure, he still can't make an intravenous fluid that is pure and sterile enough. Under the current situation, if intravenous fluid replenishment is rushed, hey, bacteremia is watching you. He didn't even have antibiotics on hand to suppress it. Gretel can only act as a doctor. If there is no intravenous injection, it can only be taken orally, but of course, the first thing to do is to complete the examination. The girl's body, clothes, and calves were covered in filth. Gretel turned a blind eye and knelt down beside the girl, took out the stethoscope and pressed it on her chest. While auscultating, he felt the girl's pulse and quickly gave instructions. Feel her calves to see if there are any cramps. Cramp. The young woman stroked it up and down and answered tremblingly. Greet sighed secretly. Calf cramps, or gastrocnemius spasms, are symptoms of vomiting and diarrhea, causing a large amount of sodium loss. As for the pulse, the touch under the fingertips is fast and weak, almost intangible. The heart rate is fast, but in terms of heart sounds, there is no atrial tachycardia or ventricular tachycardia, that is to say, the hypokalemia is not serious and does not affect the heart too much. The breath sounds were not bad, no crackles were heard, and the patient had no signs of pulmonary edema such as chest tightness, orthopnea, coughing up pink frothy sputum, or jugular vein distension. "Little sister, are you thirsty?" Gretel asked softly. The little girl raised her head slightly and opened her lips, but no sound came out. Greet shouted urgently. "Ologo! Bring me some water." "I'm coming." Aurora Wharton held a bowl of sugar and salt water in both hands, bowed her waist, poked her head, and walked quickly like a duck with her feet pattering. He bent down on his knees and brought the water bowl to the girl's mouth. The girl opened her mouth slightly, but was unable to swallow. A spoonful of sugar and salt water was put into the mouth, and soon it flowed out from the corner of the mouth. "I'll feed her." The young woman hurriedly reached out to take the bowl. Gretel stopped him with his elbow. "Don't. Let me figure it out. A dead horse becomes a live doctor." Gretel jumped up and ran outside. No matter how tight the time was, the steps could not be messed up. He washed his hands carefully to ensure that the germs on his hands were basically washed away, returned to his original position, and began to give orders. "Let her recline. Don't lie down, don't sit upright. Okay, that's fine. Tilt your head to one side. Little sister, don't be afraid. Now that you can't drink anything, I'm going to put the potion you need to drink into your stomach through a tube. Don't be afraid, relax, I'm saving you." After speaking, he took out a seed, put it in his palm, and activated the magic. A bright green light flashed, and the emerald green hollow tube grew in the wind, reaching towards the girl's nostrils. Gretel has done experiments before. The bacterial load of the tubes spawned by magic is mainly positively related to the bacterial content on the surface of the seeds and palms. As long as the hands are washed and the spawn tubes are used as gastric tubes, The cleanliness is still tolerable. The pipeline gradually deepens. The girl's eyes were full of fear, but fortunately she was still obedient. She was told to take a deep breath, and she was told to swallow, and she tried to swallow hard. The oiled emerald green thin tube went all the way down. Greet estimated that the depth was almost there, stopped inducing the gastric tube, and took out a 50 ml glass syringe. I don't have any needles, so I'll just make do with it. One end of the emerald green thin tube expanded slightly and moved up on its own, wrapping the head of the syringe. Greet held his breath, slowly pushed in 10 ml of air, and listened at the same time. Aurora stood by the side, holding the stethoscope for him, her eyes full of nervousness, and she kept mumbling. "What did you hear? What did you hear?" The sound of breath passing through the water means that the gastric tube has been inserted into the gastric juice, Greet answered silently in his mind. He pulled out the syringe, sucked in a tube full of sugar and saline solution, and slowly pushed it into the stomach tube. The amount of oral rehydration solution for children weighing less than 20 kilograms should be 250 ml per hour. How much does this little girl weigh? How fast should the gastric tube push liquid? Damn it, I'm not a pediatrician or a nurse. Nasogastric feeding is the nurse's job. Oops, she started throwing up again. Do you want to continue feeding me? Aurora was at a loss on the side. Gretel gritted his teeth. Continue. The guidelines say that vomiting is not a contraindication to oral rehydration. Moreover, there is no other way. Pour in 1 tube of sugar and salt water, and then another tube of sugar and salt water. After 2 consecutive operations, Greet handed the syringe to Aurora and asked him to operate it in the same way. He knelt next to the girl, folded his hands and caressed the girl's abdomen. The white light of the healing technique shines from the palm of your hand, and penetrates into the girl's body one by one. Although cholera enterotoxin can stimulate the intestinal tract to excessively secrete water, chloride, and carbonate, inhibit the absorption of sodium ions and chloride ions by the intestinal mucosa, leading to severe diarrhea and dehydration in patients. However, the patient's intestinal ability to absorb glucose remains intact. As long as glucose is absorbed, it can drive the paired absorption of sodium ions, the absorption of potassium ions and bicarbonate, and enhance the absorption of water. When sugar-salt water enters the intestines, it can effectively replenish water and correct ion disorders. So, please, speed up the absorption. Duodenum. Jejunum. Intestinal epithelial cells. Get moving. Get moving. Speed. Greet prayed with all her heart. The white light emitted from the palm was still a large area at first, but before you knew it, it changed into the shape of a rope, twisting and turning, back and forth. While praying, the girl's body suddenly moved. What? I can drink. I can speak out. Even if the voice is low and weak, it means that the whole person is getting better. Greet was overjoyed and quickly held the stomach tube and cancelled the birth spell. The emerald green vine quickly pulled out from the nasal cavity and turned into a small seed in his hand. Gretel took the water bowl and handed it to the girl's lips. Keep drinking. Drink as much as you can. Oral rehydration solution. Keep up the healing skills. Although he is an emergency surgery doctor, he has also read the literature and found that cholera patients do not improve that quickly. The rehydration time mentioned in the book is generally the first 6 hours and the 24 hours. But now, the effect was immediate and the girl experienced relief within 1 hour, and her symptoms returned from severe dehydration to moderate. If it's moderate, it's not that easy to die. Little Greet. Here we come. There was a rapid sound of horse hooves. Before anyone arrived, the voice came first. In a moment, Elderwood strode in with wind at his feet. Looking left and right, he stood still and struck the oak stick. Little Greet. Get out of the way. Greet quickly ducked to the side, almost tripping, and stood still against the wall. Elderwood bowed his head and prayed. Behind him, 5 or 6 students and disciples also held oak staffs and recited the prayer with him. Great God of nature! You protect us, raise us, comfort us, and guide us. We are all your children. You nourish our bodies and soothe our hearts. Now, your children are troubled by diseases. May you heal them with the grace. Dots of white light lit up on the top of everyone's wooden staff. For a moment, Elderwood held the oak staff in both hands and raised it high above his head. In the name of the God of nature. In the name of the God of nature. The lower priests shouted in unison. The white light rose and gathered, converging at a point above the heads of the priests, then suddenly exploded, and stars fell down bit by bit. Soon, the patients' complexions improved and they got up one after another. Thank the gods of nature. Thank you to the God of nature for your grace. Half of them surrounded Elderwood, and half of them surrounded Gretel, thanking him one after another. Greet quickly asked about their physical condition, and the patients rushed to answer. My stomach doesn't hurt anymore. I don't want to vomit either. I don't have diarrhea anymore. Their smiles are so bright. Gretel couldn't help but smile, but the doctor's instinct still urged him to shout loudly. Don't crowd in here. Go out and wash your hands. Take a shower. Wash them all, soak your clothes in disinfectant water, soak all the buildings and floors in disinfectant water. Go. If the dirty things are even more contaminated, a plague will still break out. He shouted and waved, and drove all the villagers out of the wooden houses, and they went to wash and clean. Elderwood wiped the sweat from his head, squeezed over and asked Gretel. Why did the plague suddenly break out? I came here immediately after receiving the news. So many people have already become sick. If you hadn't found out, half of the people in this village would have died. More than half, Gretel shrugged. As for the cause of the plague outbreak, he was a little embarrassed to say, it cannot be said that his laboratory first created the pathogenic bacteria. After a moment of silence, Sam, the great magician of the plasticity department, came over and picked up the conversation. It's a spy from the Church of the Lord of Glory who came with dirty things and polluted the water source. We are tracking his escape route. Now it seems that little Gretel is right. Everything he passes must be cleaned. There are also people who have been in contact with him. Horses. People who have been in close contact with those people, Greet added hurriedly. Old Sam smiled at him tolerantly. That's right, I have already spread the news. Now we are checking for any abnormalities everywhere. We also hope that the Natural God Church can help us. You are experts in tracking traces. At this point, he suddenly stopped, raised his head to the sky, and stretched out his hand. A small bird with a yellow beak and green feathers rushed straight down and fell into the hands of the old magician. It opened its mouth and screamed. Old Sam. The war horse that the spy rode has a strange disease. There are several horses in the stable, and the owners and people who take care of the horses are all sick. Please come over as soon as possible. Last night's chapter triggered the review for some reason, and it was locked for half an hour before being released, which affected everyone's reading. I'm very sorry. The group number is 649136249, everyone is welcome to chat together. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, please review books. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 244. Is the warhorse sick? Are people sick too? Gretel closed his eyes subconsciously. There is no need to see the patient. The infectious bacteria he purified and isolated by himself are zoonotic, and there is only one type that can be transmitted from animals to humans. He asked quickly, what is the patient's condition? Are there blisters on the skin? Is there swelling around it? Is there a high fever? Chest pain? Abdominal pain and diarrhea? Black stool? The little bird couldn't answer this question. It could only flap its wings on old Sam's hand and chirp. The old magician glanced at Gretel helplessly, repeated it sternly, and asked Gretel, "Anything else you want to ask?" The patient lies still, drinks plenty of water, eats liquid food, drinks milk and porridge. The horses are killed, burned, and the horse manure is disinfected and buried deeply. It is best to burn the horses in the stables and even the stables grate, he answered without thinking. The sick person is isolated, and all secretions and excreta are disinfected and buried deeply. People who have been in close contact with him are all isolated and observed. After a pause, he quickly flipped through infectious diseases in his brain. 8 days. The old magician added a few more words and released the message bird. Then he turned around and asked Gretel with a straight face. "That, and this, are not the same disease." "Definitely not," Gretel blurted out. One drank unclean water, one was infected from horses, one suffered from vomiting and diarrhea, and I haven't seen the other one, but it is very likely that it was on the face, neck. The problem occurred first in the hands and feet. It's definitely not the same disease. Are you sure? You don't need to go see it right away. Probably. Greet smiled bitterly. Myself, in short, if you delay for a while, I can still do it until I can identify what it is. In short, the disease is not too urgent. Horses are slaughtered and burned, and people are isolated. It won't spread too widely. Anthrax, human-to-human transmission, is extremely rare. It's written in black and white in the book. Although this sentence may not be reliable in another world, if a bacterium looks like the one he has studied in the book, and the animal experiment results are like the one he has studied in the book, then, with a high probability, he can get it. The words in the book should be used as a life-saving straw. Take the first one. Is there anything else? Old Sam's face turned darker and darker. Gretel shook his head seriously. It's hard to say. That intruder carried too many things with him. As you can see, after running such a long way, things can be detected in the lake. I still said the same thing: the road he ran along, the grass, the soil, disinfect or burn, people, isolate and observe. Two groups of patients, two different groups of patients, are in front of us. Aurora ran around, spraying disinfectant all over the village. The prophecy magician who came with her slowly walked around to check, and suddenly shouted, "I found traces of the intruder. I stayed by the water." Old Sam walked over quickly. The prophecy magician pointed at the ground for him to see. Under the tracer magic, a vague human figure appeared beside the pool. The legs, feet, knees, and even the hands on the ground could be vaguely identified. Looking at it like that, if a person squats and kneels by the pool, it is just convenient to drink water from the pool. The old magician took a slight breath. He waved to a villager, pointed to the pool and asked, "What is this pool used for?" "Those who store water. The water for drinking and use in the village is drawn from the pond." There is no longer any doubt. Two outbreaks, two different plagues, are caused by the invader leaving traces and spreading, causing disease in a group. If the previous orders of the great magicians to increase their vigilance were due to the pressure from the legendary mages and the preference of the evocation and necromancy systems for Gretel, then now, it was based on the duties of the review committee members. Old Sam took out a gold coin with wings, raised it in front of him, and flicked the edge of the gold coin. It has been confirmed that after the invaders escaped from the laboratory, they carried a variety of plagues and spread them easily. It is recommended that the alert level be compared to the dragon scale poison spreading incident. The treatment method is to accept the suggestion of the laboratory owner, burn the vegetation and soil along the road, pour a large amount of bleaching powder into the water body, and isolate all those who have direct or indirect contact with the intruder for observation. Jury member, Sam Lane. After finishing his speech, he loosened his fingers and the wings of the gold coin flapped like a meteor, soaring towards the Tower of Babel dozens of miles away. Old Sam's suggestion as a member of the review committee was quickly responded to. The gold coin went and came back, buzzing, and exploded with 4 words like thunder. Agree to execute. 5 of the 8 members of the review committee have been to Gretel's laboratory, and among the other 3, the one from the Department of Change also has a good impression of him. Coupled with the constant news of the plague, the review meeting reached a consensus before the evening of that day. Invest enough power to burn, isolate, and disinfect. From the 3 major magic academies, all students with level 1 or above as wizards were dispatched. Under the leadership of the teacher, the fire was spread along the road, and the fire licked all the way along the mountain road. Well, compared to the electrolysis method, which can produce twice as much bleaching powder, it also requires a high-level laboratory. The gentlemen of the review committee felt that it would be more economical to let students work for free. Burning hands. Burning hands. Burning. Fireball. Pay attention to controlling the burning area. The only thing that needs to be burned is this hillside. Save your energy. You still have a lot of places to burn. This time's work will be included in everyone's final assessment, so you must do it well. At the same time, all the laboratories on the 375th floor of the Babel Tower and the 58th, 59th, and 60th floors of the Plastic Energy Mage Tower were brightly lit. Lightning flashes. Bags of salt and lime were dragged into the laboratory, and bags of bleaching powder were sent out of the wizard's tower. These expensive bleaching powders are dumped without hesitation into all water bodies that the invaders may pass through, as well as downstream of the water bodies. What is even more tense is the city hall of this mage city. According to the orders issued directly by the review committee, they dispatched a large number of clerks every day to visit door to door, report, and summarize the information. Bridgetown reported that 5 people had diarrhea and 3 had fever. All of them were common illnesses and there was no cluster of illnesses. Wheaton Town reports that 3 people have diarrhea and 7 have fever. There is no cluster of cases. Cows Town report. Disinfection, isolation, circulation control, and reporting of suspected cases. In this battle against the plague, Gretel is the busiest. Can the patient be released from isolation? Let him confirm his recovery and complete bacterial culture before a conclusion can be drawn. Whether the water body should continue to be disinfected, he also needs to take water samples for culture, dyeing, and microscopic examination, and then he can make a final decision. As for those suspected patients, whether they were infected with the plague or not could not be determined until Greet had diagnosed them. Greet, T. I'm not in the laboratory, I don't want to do hundreds of test materials a day, I finally understand the pressure those inspectors were under during the epidemic. But can we not do it? No way. The safety of the Magic Council headquarters is in danger. Whether it's Category A or Category B, any infectious disease really breaks out. When the nest is overturned, how can there be any eggs? Greet had a sore back on the first day. I felt dizzy the next day. Starting from the 3rd day, his eyes were watering and he started to think about all kinds of hard work. Elder Wood, do you want to know how I judge whether this patient can be released from isolation? Do you know what I am doing with these test tubes, broth, and dyes? You know how I judge whether these patients are infected with the plague. If you want to know, I'll teach you. Can you teach us? A head suddenly appeared next to him. Greet turned his head, and the jury member of Black Crow Swamp appeared next to him once again. Gretel smiled. Okay. But I only have 2 microscopes. If I want a 1000x microscope, only the Alchemy Guild has it. I'll buy it. The great magician moved his feet, and the skeleton beside him rushed out and transformed into a bone horse on the spot. The great magician was about to go out when he suddenly turned his head. How many people can I send to learn? For the sake of the commission from the microscope, Greet wanted to say, "They have prepared 30 units over there." When the words came to his lips, he shrank back and looked at the necromancer worriedly. "Let me tell you first, you can't use what I teach to spread plague on a large scale and kill civilians. From this day on, Gretel has 10 deist priests on his left and 10 necromancers on his right." With one command and one action, he followed him to take samples, stain them, and conduct microscopic examinations. When the bacteria were spawned, the necromancer did not have this magic, so the priests had to help. After a few days of learning, a different kind of friendship was formed. Aurora Warden was among them. He originally didn't want to get involved, but the teacher scolded him. "I told you to help before." He refused to teach me. It was before. Now he has taught so many people, and you are still missing. You don't follow the people you follow closely, and you want to wait for them to beg you to learn? I'm so angry. Get out." After receiving a kick from the teacher on the butt, Aurora had no choice but to roll over to help. Gretel didn't mind it at all. He taught him as much as he wanted to teach others. Not only that, he also threw over a paper. "Help me fill in the following data, regarding the various disinfecting effects. Send them out together later. Count as your second work." Aurora. "Yeah. Got another paper. The boss is so generous." Following the boss is indeed the right thing to do. The plague crisis in Nevis has finally come to an end after more than 10 days. No pathogenic bacteria could be detected in the last patient's excrement, and no abnormalities were reported after more than 10 days of continuous monitoring of suspected patients. Under the eternal flame, Greet drew a circle heavily on the text submitted by Aurora Paper Tool Warden. "I'll hand it in tomorrow. Black Crow Swamp has hinted at it several times. If I don't finish the question, I'm afraid they'll come and demolish my laboratory. Besides, they've seen pretty much what they can see. Now that they are released, they know what to pay attention to here, and other schools also know what happened. If they are not released, it will be more difficult to deal with the trouble. Boss. Boss." Barbarian voices sounded outside. Gretel put down his pen, opened the door and went out. "What's the matter?" "There's someone looking for you outside." What came to their door was a team that Gretel had never seen before. 5 knights and 2 magicians. The queue was neat and the expressions were serious. The knights all wore uniform light steel armor and dark blue cloaks. On the hilt of the long sword, 3 gems flashed side by side, and there was no difference in the position of the inlays. The 2 magicians wore identical slim-fitting riding clothes with stand-up collars and black cloaks with hoods. With its sharp and neat style, you can tell at a glance that it is a standard military uniform. The rain fell softly from the hood, but it did not wet the magicians' clothes at all. The badges on their chests are both 5th-level magicians. Whether it was the staffing or the value of the clothing and equipment, it was a whole level higher than the patrols Gret had seen. "Herr Gretel Nordmat." The magician on the left spurred his horse forward. Seeing Gretel nod, he leaned forward slightly on his horse and handed out a document with paint on it. "We are the law enforcement team of the Magic Council. We are now ordered to summon you to the 120th floor of the Tower of Babel at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to be interrogated regarding this laboratory leak incident." 3,400 words. Another update completed. Oh yeah. Come on. If you persist for 5 more days, the rewards and extra updates will be paid off. This period of time has exhausted me to death. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, please review books. Asking for various. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 245. Summons. Ask. About the lab leak. Greet's face turned pale. There was an accident in the P4 laboratory, and a bunch of Class A and Class B infectious bacteria were leaked to the outside world, causing the spread of a Class A and a Class B infectious bacteria, and dozens of patients were infected. The legal provisions were turned over page by page in my mind. Without any effort, Gretel turned to Article 331 of the criminal law. Anyone who is engaged in experimenting, preserving, carrying, or transporting infectious strains and virus strains, who violates relevant regulations and causes the spread of infectious strains and virus strains, and the consequences are serious, shall be sentenced to fixed-term imprisonment of not more than 3 years or criminal detention. If the consequences are particularly serious, he shall be sentenced to 3 years to fixed-term imprisonment of not less than 10 years but not more than 7 years. Do I count it as serious consequences or particularly serious consequences? How many years will I go to jail? Wait, does this world, this magic parliament, have any relevant regulations? I need a lawyer. Greet turned to his followers with a pale face. Aurora was also shocked and tried to comfort him. Is everything okay? It's just an interrogation. It shouldn't be too bad, right? If the matter was really serious, people would have come to arrest them. The more he talks, the less confident he becomes. Because of this leak, 5 members of the review committee visited the laboratory in person, and a group of great magicians went to the island to study the teleportation array. Aurora no longer dared to count how many people were mobilized to arrest the patrols and law enforcement teams. Is there any precedent before? Gretel looked at him in panic. When the book was used, I regretted it. When things happened, I realized that my understanding of the Magic Council was still too little. What will happen to a magician who gets into such trouble? Will he go to jail? How much compensation will he have to pay? Oro, have you heard of it? Master Warden couldn't answer for a while. He has lived in Nevis for several years, but due to his outstanding talent and the favor of his teacher, he has not heard anything outside the window. The trajectory of his life is from home to the Master's Tower, and then back home from the Master's Tower. After racking my brains and searching my guts, I finally remembered a case. Well, I seem to remember that more than 200 years ago, there was a great magician who brought something from another space and accidentally exploded. At that time, the entire academy was implicated, and hundreds of young magicians were unlucky. Later, the legendary mages decided to send him to guard another space, and he would be stationed there for 20 years or however many years. I don't want it. If the great magician gets into trouble, he will be exiled. If I get into trouble, will I be jailed? I seem to have heard that the Magic Council does have a prison. Oro, can you ask your teacher to ask for a favor? Don't worry, the teacher will definitely not ignore it. Aurora Warden tried hard to promise, I will go find him early tomorrow morning. But it can't be done now. The train doesn't run at night, we can't go up the mountain, and I haven't been summoned. Things to use. Oh. Gretel was a little depressed. Aurora dragged him back to the laboratory. Don't worry, the judges will not do anything to you. The Lord of Thunder is watching. Isn't there a legendary mage standing behind the great magician who caused trouble? Gretel was still a little panicked. That night I tossed and turned, unable to calm down during meditation, and unable to sleep well. I got up early the next day and caught the first small train to the top of the mountain, and went directly to the Tower of Babel to wait for the summons. When he usually comes here, whether it's the lounge in the Plastic Energy Department's auxiliary tower or the laboratory on the 375th floor of the Babel Tower, there's always a place to stay. This time Gretel was so worried that he didn't dare to go to either place and went directly to the 120th floor. The office was not open, the conference room was not open, and occasionally people passed by in the corridor. When they saw Greet, they all cast a strange look at him. Greet had no choice but to find an unobtrusive place at the corner of the stairs, squat silently, huddle up and wait. It was almost 9 o'clock when someone finally came over to talk to Greet. Two young magicians dressed as law enforcement officers, one on the left and one on the right, half accompanying and half escorting Gretel into the conference room. Greet looked around and saw that there was nothing else in the conference room. There was only a long table placed directly opposite the door. Behind the table were 8 high-backed armchairs lined up in a row, inlaid with gold carvings and luxuriously decorated. Tea, paper, and pens were all properly arranged. If it weren't for the nature of the meeting, even snacks and melon seeds would have been placed. On my side, there was only a small chair with no cushions or armrests. The backrest was only half the height of the opposite side. It looked like a student chair in a classroom. Should I thank you for not installing 2 armrests and installing a baffle in front of the armrests? Gretel cursed and sat down obediently. This distance, this arrangement, instantly made me feel like I was being interrogated. When the 8 jury members took their seats one by one, Greet looked calm but was already beating drums in his heart. You feel guilty? A middle-aged magician, fourth from the left, almost facing him, suddenly said. Old Sam immediately turned his head. Hey, don't use your tactics to deal with him. Several committee members laughed. The great prophecy magician whom Gretel had met a few days ago, who was quite kind to him, smiled and said, Old Sam, don't be so protective. Our school also has spells such as detecting thoughts and sensing emotions, and it's not just the charm control system that can cast them. What? Want to use magic against me? Gretel panicked again. The last time he was hit by a charming human in person, the dangers of the operation, complications, and other tragic events were all revealed in a smooth manner, and he still remembered it clearly. The great magician of the prophecy department, after laughing at his colleague, turned to Gretel with a serious expression on his face. Mr. Gretel Nordmark. Because of your improper behavior, the plague was leaked on a large scale and caused huge losses to the parliament. Do you admit it? I am coming. I knew that after causing such a big trouble, the Magic Council would not let me go. Greet's heart was pounding, and she instinctively wanted to defend herself, but what came out of her mouth was, how much was the loss? Do I want to calculate it for you? On the far right side of the long table, another great magician whom I had never seen before turned over a page with a smile. The plague leak incident ended yesterday, and all losses were only counted this morning. Since you asked, I will read it to you. This time the plague was revealed, 25 people were directly infected, including 21 farmers and 4 patrol soldiers. You managed those farmers yourself, and Elderwood, for your sake, didn't ask the council for money, so that doesn't count. The cost of magical treatment for 4 soldiers, the cost of isolation, and the damage caused by burning clothing and related items, a total of 450 gold coins. Killed and burned 15 war horses and a stable, with a total value of 400 gold coins. 850 gold coins. Greet felt a great pain in his heart, and then breathed a sigh of relief. Although it was a large sum of money, fortunately he could still afford the compensation. Unexpectedly, the great magician continued to read. 3 magic academies and more than 600 teachers and students were mobilized to carry out incineration and disinfection operations. The cost of attendance is considered to be 1 contribution point per person per day. The incineration and disinfection lasted for 3 days, a total of 1,800 contribution points. Done. Bankrupted. Greet's vision went dark. The great magician smiled and turned another page. The production of disinfectant and bleaching powder requires the use of laboratories 1-10 on the 375th floor of the Babel Tower, 58-60 floors of the Plastic Energy Mage Tower, a total of 24 laboratories. Laboratory rent, manpower. Greet was shaky and breathless. Looking to the left, the 2 great magicians of the protection and conjuration departments crossed their arms, looking like they were watching a good show. Looking to the right, Old Sam had a heavy face and helplessness in his eyes. The great magician of the necromancy department, well, that's what's bad about the necromancy department. He has a withered face wrapped in bones, and he can't tell what kind of expression he has. Wait, you want me to lose money? If you can afford to pay, you most likely won't go to jail. Of course, if you can't afford the compensation, you probably won't go to jail. The most you can do is sell yourself to pay off the debt. Greet's mind changed and he calmed down a little. It's easy to talk about compensation, talk about accident liability and distribution ratio. I'm not the main responsibility. Even if you get someone with equal responsibility, you can still lose half of the compensation. You still have to rely on yourself. Gretel struggled to sit upright and tried to defend himself. But the leak was not caused by me on purpose. It was the spies of the Lord of Radiance who entered the laboratory, and I was the victim. Ahem, the direct cause of the leakage is indeed the spy invasion, the great magician of the protection department interjected. But we have all seen that the spy is just a thief, and he does not have powerful magical abilities. He was able to enter your laboratory because the laboratory lacked magical protection. We have all seen your laboratory. There is not even a magic alarm, and all defensive spells are non-existent. If it is invaded by a foreign enemy and causes leakage, it is your own fault. It's not my fault. Gretel almost jumped. He raised his head high. I don't do magic protection, that's because the laboratory is in Neva City. In the hinterland of the Magic Parliament. It should be safe. Could it be that if other magicians' achievements were stolen, leading to serious consequences, would all magicians be punished? Instead of reflecting on its own security issues, does the Magic Council want to punish the victimized magicians? I haven't made a claim yet. I allowed spies to roam around and destroyed half of my experimental results, and I haven't complained to the Magic Council yet. The atmosphere in the conference room suddenly became tense. The great magicians looked at each other, each looking a little embarrassed. To be honest, Gretel cannot be blamed for being broken into by spies. If it were a violent-tempered great magician, not to mention being called for questioning by the judges, he would probably have been knocked on the door, pounded on the table, and kept demanding compensation. Forget it, tell him the truth, right? I won't tell, you tell. The committee members winked at each other. During the stalemate, a quick and hoarse voice suddenly came from the corner of the office roof. Nick! Come to the top immediately. Large-scale magic reaction. Come immediately to help observe. Hey! Here we come. The great magician of the prophecy department raised his head and responded. Ignoring the looks of his colleagues, he jumped up and ran towards the door. Teacher is looking for me. I'm going up. Thanks I never knew what I should change my name to reward 100 starting coins. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Giolan 2020. Chapter 246. The great magician of the prophecy department ran out with his robe in hand. In the conference room, several other review members looked at each other and fell silent. The star dome on the top of the Tower of Babel is equipped with two powerful magic arrays, using the year-round strong wind from the top of Igor Peak and the lightning that shines in the clouds for 200 days a year as energy sources. Looking up at the sky changes, the seasons pass, stars, planets, comets, and meteors are all reflected in the magic array. The other overlooks the Earth. With Neva's Peak as the center, the Arctic icefield, the western continent, and the eastern wave ocean, all kinds of changes are fed back into the magic circle, making it easier for the Magic Council to monitor the movements of the powerful. Normally, the magic circle envelops the entire kingdom, and the wizard towers are clearly visible, and some powerful light spots can be seen thousands of miles outside the kingdom. This range is enough of a warning to prevent experts from reaching the border silently. And at the moment of need, with the joint support of legendary mages and many great magicians, the display range of the magic circle will be extremely expanded. Even the Orc Kingdom to the west and the new continent at the end of the Waves Ocean can be vaguely seen in the magic circle. Now, the legendary mage who presides over the Star Dome calls for help, and a large-scale spell reaction. Where is it? What kind of large-scale spell? Who started it? I'm going to the Mystic Lock. The jury members of the Conjuration Department stood up in a hurry. If it is an enemy, if it is a large-scale spell launched thousands of miles away to attack Igor Peak, then the prophecy system will issue an early warning, and the mystery lock will have to make emergency adjustments accordingly. Although there is a level 15 archmage who presides over it daily and a legendary master who will take care of it, he still knows better and goes there as soon as possible to wait for orders. As soon as he left, several review committee members from the Protection Department, Transformation Department, and Illusion Department left in a flurry. Old Sam stayed at the last one. Before leaving, he took a deep look at Gretel. No matter what, your laboratory's weak protection is also an important reason for this accident. You'd better think carefully about how to strengthen the protection, how to prevent the plague seeds from leaking, and how to solve the problem if it is really leaked. Presenting a complete plan will also facilitate the review meeting. I just want a copy of Laboratory Management Methods, it's called the Regulations on Biosafety Management of Pathogenic Microorganism Laboratories, and a copy of regulations related to the prevention and control of infectious diseases. This is not a difficult task. The spread of bacterial culture methods should have been included. Otherwise, if he really gets meningitis in 3 days and smallpox in 2 days, he won't be able to survive. Greet nodded in agreement. He watched old Sam close the door and leave. He took out a stack of papers with one hand and the endless ink pen from his breast pocket with the other hand. He looked around, dragged his chair to the edge of the long table, spread out the paper on the long table dedicated to committee members, half written, half copied, and began to write. The conference room was temporarily quiet. The hall on the top floor of the Babel Tower, known as the Star Dome, was a lively scene. The legendary mage of the Prophecy Department, Mrs. Ender, was dressed in black gauze without wind. She held the crystal ball high in her hands and stood tremblingly in the center. With her as the center, 12 great magicians stood equidistantly apart, forming a perfect circle, either holding crystal balls, pendulums, or holding gem-encrusted scepters. The group was rapt. Chanting the incantation, 12 rays of light shot out from the magic props and focused on Lady Ender's crystal ball. The crystal ball shines brightly. The magic array on the ground also lit up, from small to large, from hazy to clear. Immediately, someone lay down to observe and record. 40 degrees south by east. The distance, between the 8th and 9th rings. Spell strength minus 10,357. 10,359. 10,461. 10578. The fluctuating nature of the spell, divine magic. The faces of all the great magicians in the hall were serious. The magic circle on the Star Dome is divided into 3 rings, with the Igor Peak as the origin and the farthest point of the kingdom's land as the end point. Using this as a standard, push it out circle by circle, between the 8th and 9th rings, at a position of 40 degrees south by east. Exactly, the holy city taught by the Lord of Glory. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The light doors of teleportation opened one after another, and legendary mages walked out of the light doors with serious faces. They gathered around the magic circle, lowered their heads, and stared at the ethereal and expanding white light spots in the magic circle, constantly measuring, calculating, and estimating. There is no fluctuation in the space barrier. The range is not concentrated enough. It is not like a single target magic. There hasn't been much movement in the east recently, right? Yes, it's further east. It's winter. It's possible that the Orc Kingdom will send out a large-scale attack to grab food, but it's unlikely that a single person will attack the church city. What about the vampires? That old guy has been asleep recently, so he probably won't cause trouble. Other than him, no one else deserves such a big fuss. The intensity is still rising. 11,143, 12,056. So fast. What do they want to do? A big wishing spell? So sudden? Is there any news about our hidden people over there? No, there is such a big movement, and I had better not move, it will be too easy to be discovered. Eagle Peak is 2,000 miles southeast. City of Glory, City of Miracles. The Pope, dressed in white robes and wearing a golden crown, flew over the glorious cathedral. On the left and right sides, at the top of the two tall towers of the church, a high-ranking priest is half-kneeling on each side. And the Pope flying in mid-air, forming a triangle. One of the two people was wearing a red robe, and the other was wearing a black robe. The man in red robe holds a sword, and the man in black robe holds a large open book. We lowered our heads, followed the Pope's voice, and prayed in unison. Great Lord of glory, you are the Lord of heaven and earth, you are the true God who created all things. We were born by your love and grace, and grew up by your nurture and blessing. You are the greatest, you are the highest, you are the most holy, you are the most merciful. May you look at us, bless us, and cleanse us. In the square of the glorious cathedral, thousands of clergymen, dressed in white, prostrate themselves on the ground and sang along. The majestic prayers echoed between heaven and earth, getting higher and farther. As they prayed, a sacred and majestic power slowly emerged, falling from the high sky, covering the glorious city. In the city of glory, priests, holy knights, magistrates, and ordinary believers all put down what they were doing, walked out of their homes, and fell on the ground. Even patients who were seriously ill and unable to get out of bed still struggled to get out of bed and crawled out of the door. An inexplicable divine touch captured their hearts. They shed tears and prayed in unison. The Supreme and Holy Lord of Glory. The light on the top of the cathedral was getting stronger and stronger. The Pope was holding a golden disc in his hand, and his whole body seemed to be immersed in the light, or melted by the holy light. If someone looks down from a high altitude at this time, they may be shocked by the strange sight they have never seen before. The upper half of the glory city is white and crystal clear, spotless. Priests and warriors, everyone is covered with glittering brilliance, just like the kingdom of heaven coming to earth. In the lower half, there was black water flowing across it, making it unspeakably filthy. Each of the believers wore dirty robes, either luxurious or ragged, but they all struggled and fell on the road, with withered faces and twisted fingers. The further you go down, the more filthy and smelly you get. The brilliance penetrates the city, penetrating through the slums of the slums. Under the dilapidated roofs, twisted, limp, and lifeless corpses are all as dry as mummies. The light continues to shine. Churches, houses, soil, and sewers are as transparent as this light that penetrates everything. At the very edge of the holy city, in the sewer near the river bank, a skeleton jumped to the table and wrote the last word. The mystery remains forever. He stuffed the scroll into the mouth of a skull. The skull's eyes, nostrils, and 3 gems shine at the same time. The paper scroll disappeared without a trace, and the next moment, snow-white light swept over, and the skeleton, paper and pen, tables and chairs, and skulls melted away instantly like boiling soup and snow. And this brilliance swept over every inch of the holy city. Under the eaves, in the ditches, and in the mud, black steam surged up and disappeared in the light. The cause of this plague finally disappeared under the Pope's wholehearted prayer and the large-scale magical power that concentrated the power of the entire holy city. Everyone, whether they have just contracted the disease or are dying, whether they are blind or have both legs broken, all those who still have one breath left can return to their healthiest and most perfect state under the illumination of the holy light. State. Full of joy, they praised loudly. Great Lord of glory, you are the eternal holiness and the only light. The brilliance of divine magic lasted from morning to noon, and from noon to evening, and finally converged. The Pope slowly flew down and walked slowly inside, surrounded by high-ranking clergymen. On the top of the Babel Tower, the monitoring results of the magic array were also reported one by one. The readings are starting to drop. 5,287. 4,016. 2179. There is no high-energy spell reaction in the surrounding area, ruling out the possibility of attacking the Parliament. Alert lifted. The magicians involved in the surveillance breathed a sigh of relief. Mrs. Ender put down the crystal ball and said in a hoarse voice, "Thank you for your hard work." A false alarm. The legendary mages took separate steps, and the members of the jury who had gathered to stand by and prepare for emergencies, or rather join in the fun, also exited the Star Dome one after another. A group of people gathered at the elevator entrance, waiting to go down, and they couldn't help but start talking. So, what exactly is going on? I don't know. Are they crazy? Clear the ground? Get rid of the spies? It shouldn't happen. Is there a traitor inside? Is there a split? For such a large-scale divine art, the Pope will have to be replaced next year, right? I wonder if the orcs will take the opportunity to fight. When magicians gossip, they are no better than ordinary people. He was rambling here and there, and the more he talked, the more nonsense he talked about. Suddenly, the elevator door opened with a ding, and a bone bird flew out and hit the necromancer in the jury. The black-robed mage silently opened a bird rib and took out the message inside the bird's belly. Skinny fingers unfolded the scroll, lips moved, and silently read line by line. The plague is prevalent in the holy city. First the poor, then the apprentices, then the priests and deputies. Vomiting and diarrhea, the stench is overwhelming, the dead have withered faces and shriveled skin. One person is sick, and it spreads throughout the family. One person is cured, and 3 people are sick. 2 people were saved, and 10 were sick. In 10 days, 56 out of 10 civilians died, and 23 out of 10 deputies fell ill. After the straight and flowing handwriting, there are 2 lines of information that are obviously hastily scribbled on. The Pope activates holy radiance. The mystery will last forever. The black-robed mage silently held the scroll tightly. He turned his head and looked to the southeast, as if he saw the loyal skeleton that had been lurking in the sewers for decades, reduced to ashes by a large-scale magical spell. He walked into the elevator in silence and descended to the 120th floor with his colleagues. Finally he touched old Sam on his right and handed over the note. It seems that what the spy stole has been accounted for. Several heads came together to take a look. The great mage of the change department couldn't help but sigh. It's little Greet's fault again. By the way, where is this kid? It seems I left him in the office. Old Sam walked forward quickly. From morning to evening, they ate and drank on the top floor. Little Gretel didn't know if anyone was taking care of him. He was brought here under the pretext of interrogation, so no one would bring him lunch, right? Old Sam walked quickly. The conference room was quiet and there was no movement at all. He reached out to push the door open, but stopped before his palm touched the door. SHH. My favorite in this chapter is the nameless skeleton. The secret remains forever. Thanks to @Red Snowdens for the 300 starting coins. 3,400 words. Another chapter completed. One step closer to being finished and adding more. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, please review books. It's almost the end of the month, Don't save your monthly passes. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Lan 2020. Chapter 247. Chapter 247. I propose to listen to little Greet, who is in favor and who is against. The great magician raised and retracted his palm. In the conference room, magic fluctuations came one after another, like a firm and powerful heartbeat, and like a butterfly struggling to break out of its cocoon. The great magician stood at the door for a moment, his eyebrows moving slightly, as if he was surprised or happy. This kid is going to advance. A group of people were blocked by him at the door, and they were already a little impatient. The great magician of the conjuration department stretched out his hand, and a cherry-sized secret eye flew out from his fingers and rolled under the crack of the door. Then, the ball of light worked hard to get bigger and thinner, spread itself out like a pancake, and slid in along the crack of the door. The light curtain of the secret eye opened immediately. Through the light curtain, the great magician saw Gretel sitting on the edge of the long table, on a high-backed chair on the far right. Raise your head, close your eyes, rest your head on the back of the chair, and place your forearms flat on the armrests of the chair, forming a stable meditation posture. This kid doesn't regard himself as an outsider at all. The black-robed mage of the necromancy department was the first to laugh. Everyone looked at him sideways. Greet is sitting on your chair. You still look very proud. He's not from Black Crow Swamp. No, he launched a plague and killed half of the people in the holy city of glory. The Pope used super large magic to suppress it. Is this a natural necromancer? In any case, you are meditating, and judging from the magic fluctuations, it is still the advanced meditation of a magician, so it is best not to disturb you. Old Sam took 2 steps back, raised his hand to press the badge representing the jury members on his chest, and lowered his voice. Mr. Herman Cruz. Mr. Herman Cruz. Call me. There was a light on the wall. At the door of the conference room, on the surface of the smooth black spar, a human face sketched in simple strokes lit up, which was the spirit of the Tower of Babel. Old Sam nodded slightly and greeted the face. Mr. Herman Cruz. In the conference room, there is a junior magician who is meditating to advance. Could you please do me a favor and adjust the elemental environment of the conference room to the state of the primary meditation room? The entry-level meditation room costs 100 contribution points per day to rent. The crystal buzzed and vibrated, and a semi-mechanical voice came out of the small hole on the side. Temporary adjustment, the fee is doubled. Do you pay, or does the person inside pay? I pay. Old Sam took off his badge painfully. Greet was in deep meditation and was unaware of the movement outside. The judges left, and he stayed alone in the conference room writing. As he wrote, his mind became clearer and clearer. It seems like the council doesn't want me to go to jail. You don't necessarily want to bankrupt me. What's the benefit of letting me go bankrupt? My little net worth is a drop in the bucket for the council. They can't even get enough to eat if I rob my family. If I really have to pay for it, the worst I can do is negotiate business with them and sell these management regulations to them. By the way, there are also the previous middle school chemistry textbooks and electrolytic smelting methods. There are many things that are not sold. As soon as the sense of security returned, Gretel's shoulders relaxed. The tension that had been suppressed from last night to now disappeared without a trace, and the inexplicable feeling that appeared after it was confirmed that the plague was gone, once again filled the air. Like the rising spring tide, like the sprouting of green grass. That vigorous and vital feeling surrounded him uncontrollably. Are you going to advance? Does the mage level also need to be upgraded to 3 levels? Greet was surprised and happy. He dropped the half-written outline and looked around. He hesitated for a second between sit on the hard ground and start meditating and occupy a high-backed chair at random. He decisively inserted the quill back into his chest and rushed to the nearest high-backed chair. Well, During the previous interrogation, it was revealed that the chair belonged to the necromancer. He would definitely not mind. Even if the concentration of elements is not deliberately adjusted, the meditation environment in the Tower of Babel is much better than the outside world, as long as a nearby laboratory does not suddenly explode. When the great magicians arrived, Gretel's advanced meditation was coming to an end, and the filling and strengthening of the spiritual core was nearly completed. What faced Gretel was another problem he had encountered before. This time, in the meditation environment, which magic is engraved? Last time I chose B ultrasound magic, and the effect was quite good. What about this time? Choose X-ray magic or his modified version of Burning Hands. Greet ruled out X-ray magic without much hesitation. He didn't make many changes to this magic, and the power of the spell mainly depends on the magic item that serves as the light source. Not to mention, this thing is still a level 0 magic. Even if it is engraved, the profit is not high. Burning Hands? Gretel hesitated. The burning hands were indeed very fragrant, but he was still a little unwilling to do so. I always feel that since I am a doctor, I can just equip myself with a bunch of medical magic and turn myself into a human-shaped flamethrower? Given the choice, it's better not to. Correct. Try that fertility spell. Although it is a divine art, but, hey, who says that divine art cannot be engraved in a meditation environment? Gretel immediately started trying. As luck would have it, although the growth of vegetation is a divine spell, it also comes with a scroll. Where there is a scroll, there is a spell model. Of course, the scroll is two-dimensional, and the spell model outlined in the meditation environment is three-dimensional. How to pull the two dimensions together to make it three-dimensional requires a magician to personally test it. Isn't it just solid geometry? I'm familiar with this. Tried once, failed. Tried twice, failed. The third try, oops, I'm a little unsteady. Higher element concentrations and a more stable surrounding environment are quietly arriving at this moment. Greet breathed a sigh of relief, gathered his nerves, and continued the experiment. Main structure, output intensity, casting range. Hey, it is best to have a variable hourglass shape for the casting range. The narrowest one can imitate the spell paths of freezing ray and flash spells, only emitting a ray of light, and limiting the spawning range to this beam, or the diameter of a ray of light. The widest one can be draw a large circle with a diameter of 1 meter, 2 meters, or 3 meters. As long as you can keep up with the effort, it will be no problem. As for the shaping of spawning objects, that is another problem, which can be solved by attaching it to the side area. Gretel had no worries, closed his eyes, and was completely immersed in the creation of the spell. Outside the conference room, a group of great magicians looked at each other in confusion. I said, how long do we have to wait? How long did it take you to advance to level 3? Half a day, right? When did this kid start? No matter when it starts, there's no need for us to be stuck here, right? Yeah, it's so stupid to stand at the door. It's already dinner time, I have to get off work. Then just leave. The committee member who shouted I want to get off work did not leave. Even though he is from the charm control department, the school farthest from Gretel's research, he is still full of curiosity about Gretel. Looking around, he turned around and entered his office. As soon as the door closed, he sat down and started waiting. Bang bang. Bang bang. Bang bang. A series of slamming sounds. Old Sam turned and walked towards his office. When he turned his head, he saw the black-robed mage still poking at the door. Why don't you leave? How can I leave if you don't leave? He is from our plasticity department. Of course I have to wait and see. Why, you still want to poach someone? Don't you think he is more suitable for Black Crow Swamp? Can you Thunderhorns do what we did today? If you have the ability, you can defeat the Lord of Thunder, Old Sam snorted, turned around and gave the opponent a slap on the back of his head. Just as he was about to enter his room, he saw that the magician from the conjuration department was about to close the door, and immediately rushed over with "Hey, hey, hey. Let's go together. Let me see what's going on inside." After a few brushing sounds, several closed doors were opened one after another. A moment later, a group of high-ranking jury members crowded into the office of the great conjuration magician, facing the light curtain. Although the committee member's office is not small, it only has a table, a chair, and a couch. It can accommodate 3 or 5 people, but it will not be able to accommodate any more. But these old men didn't care. They were either leaning on the armrests of the sofa or lying on the back of the sofa, happily urging, "Hurry! Hurry! Bring the secret eye closer. I want to see how he progresses." The arcane eye can only see what is visible to the naked eye, and cannot see the elemental fluctuations in the room. Turning and turning, the camera zoomed out and zoomed in, even Greet's fluttering eyelashes were clearly shown, but it was unclear whether his advancement was smooth and how long it would take to complete it. The only thing that can be seen is that Greet looks calm and seems to be fine. Even if she is a peerless beauty, looking at her blankly like this will become boring after a long time, not to mention that Gretel is still hundreds of kilometers away from the peerless beauty. After enduring it for a long time, there was really nothing to see. The great conjuration magician turned his secret eyes and pointed at the half-written piece of paper on the table. A bunch of heads immediately gathered in front of the light curtain. The paper outlines the main points and only writes a general outline. 1. Modes of transmission of infectious diseases: droplet transmission, food and water transmission, animal transmission, skin contact transmission. 2. Block the spread of infectious diseases: wear masks, boil food and water, wash hands, kill sources of infection, mosquitoes, flies, fleas, mice, clean clothes and bedding, and disinfect the environment. 3. Infectious disease laboratory management: air, water, airlock design, regular disinfection, inspection, management of pathogen carrying and transportation. 4. Public health: build tap water supply facilities, disinfect drinking water, and supply boiled water, implement a specific disease reporting system, establish an infectious disease hospital. 5. 6. 7. Sure enough, I still need to force it. The great magician of the protection department sighed. Look, someone brought it over to scare him, and he immediately took out the thing. Maybe that's what he originally wanted to say, old Sam snorted. You can't write so much just by patting your head. I asked, should we announce these things? How to announce them? Which ones should be implemented immediately? The gentlemen of the jury fell silent. Among other things, establishing tap water supply facilities, disinfecting drinking water, and supplying boiled water is a huge expense. Establishing a specialized infectious disease hospital costs another amount of money. This. Formulating budgets, promulgating regulations, and implementing regulations are originally the responsibilities of the review committee. But this is a big deal. It's the end of the year. Where can we find the budget to do this? A series of eyes were cast on the great magician of the transformation department. As an alchemist, he has always been the chief steward of the review committee and the preparer of the budget. The one who was still settling accounts with Gretel with a smile on his face in the morning had a wry smile on his face. This year alone, the things Greet has done in recent months have already consumed several unplanned funds. But laboratory management must be done. The person from the protection department pointed at the light screen and glanced sideways at the black-robed mage. I propose that all magicians who study plague and the management of laboratories follow the above. Who is in favor? Who is against? Reordering is normal, new additions are plummeting. It seems it's time to hug the editor's lap and make recommendations. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, please review books. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right. Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 248. Who agrees and who opposes? 7 pairs of eyes looked at the black-robed mage. The necromancer froze on the spot. What, after a long time of tossing, the boomerang hit me? Before the establishment of the Magic Council, the research practice of various schools and even magicians was, take care of yourself, and no one should dictate to others. Everyone's research ideas are different, and each company has its own secrets. Do you want to take care of them? If you really don't like it, or your research really hinders me, then come and have a quarrel, or even start a fight. For example, the magicians in the medical branch hate Crow Swamp dragging corpses on their territory. After the establishment of the Magic Council, various schools and organizations finally had a place to sit down and discuss. Even so, the Parliament gave enough freedom to the research of magicians. Let's take the necromancy school as an example. Even if it is the plague branch, as long as the disease does not spread across the kingdom or only plagues its own territory, the attitude of the Magic Council is, please do as you please. But this time is different. The plague seeds created by Gretel were leaked a little bit, and they exploded in 2 places immediately. The 2 places were still different. Considering that this project was funded by the plague branch, and a group of necromancers were gearing up to get started, the review committee, or rather the 7 committee members except for the necromancers, had a very unanimous attitude. This must be taken care of. A little Gretel made such a big noise, and a group of mages from the plague branch were messing around with the things he gave them. Can everyone survive? There must be a solution. Well, the first step in the solution is to call little Gretel and pretend to scare him. Now it seems that scaring worked well, maybe a little too well. Greet wrote down a bunch of things, and those entries alone seemed like a big project. At the same time, a big explosion occurred in the holy city of glory. The black-robed mage froze. Who agrees and who opposes? If he agrees, it is equivalent to putting a yoke on his head. You can imagine how the magicians of the plague branch and even his own legend will hit him, but do you want to object? The Lord of Radiance has been forced to use its ultimate move. This plague is really going to break out in their own territory. The Magic Council doesn't have that many high-level priests. Can it withstand it? If you dare to speak out against it, I'm afraid Black Crow Swamp, or at least the plague branch in Black Crow Swamp, will be defeated on the spot. I want to report to His Excellency the Immortal One first, he answered bravely. The Immortal, the legendary mage stationed at the headquarters of the necromancy. Theoretically, the policy regarding the necromancy school can be decided by him. This is a reasonable request. I also want to report today's incident to His Majesty the Lord of Thunder. Old Sam's dark brown eyes turned slightly and stared straight at the black-robed mage. By the way, he wants to pry into our family. You must file a complaint. Complain fiercely. The gentlemen members reached preliminary agreement. They observed the situation in the conference room for a while, and then quietly dispersed when Gretel had completed his advancement and was about to end his meditation. Well, with so many people waiting for him, the little guy is going to have his tail raised. When Gretel walked out of the conference room, rubbing his growling stomach, he saw a metal golem standing at the door, his eyes sparkling. He turned around and held a piece of paper in front of him. Mr. Gretel Nordmark. 1. There is a restaurant on the 2nd floor of Babel Tower. Come in anytime and eat for free. 2. The guest room on the Carlisle side is still there. 3. It is recommended to complete what you write during the day as early as possible, especially in laboratory management. 4. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, the 120th floor of Babel Tower, see you at the same place. Also, congratulations on advancing to level 3 mage. Sam Lane. What? Are you going to finish writing tonight? Greet wailed. Howling and howling, he still continued to cry until late at night. The next day, he crawled to the conference room with dark circles under his eyes. 8 committee members lined up opposite him and smiled at him. Well, it's not all smiles. At least the black-robed mage, apart from his black robe and black eye circles, even his face is black. When she looked at him, her eyes were so sad that it was hard to put into words, and she was almost complaining. Mr. Gretel Nordmark, the great magician who settled accounts with him with a smile during yesterday's meeting, was the first to greet him. Before Greet's eyesight went dark and he was about to run away, the man opened an account book and said slowly, "The review committee has carefully considered your opinion. Frankly speaking, the nature of intentional damage and damage caused by negligence are completely different. The spy invasion caused the plague seeds to leak, and the fault is not entirely yours. But accountability and compensation cannot be completely exempted." He pointed at Gretel to stop him from jumping up to speak. "So, the review will determine that you bear secondary responsibility. In this leak, the Congress will bear 60% of the losses, your Thunderhorn will bear 30%, and you will personally pay 10%. Do you agree?" 10%, Gretel feels much better. After all, in the previous life, if a motor vehicle traffic accident was found to be secondary liability, 30% compensation would have to be paid no matter what. Moreover, Thunderhorn had to bear 30% of the losses. "I feel really sorry and embarrassed. But thinking about the laboratory rental fees and the work expenses of high-level mages, Gretel was not in the mood to worry about others. The Thunderhorn family has a big business and can afford it. It seems like 10% of his own number is a lot of money for him. So how much do I have to pay?" 3750 contribution points. The great magician smiled with a friendly face and pushed the list forward. "The change has been wiped out for you. You can look at the list and raise any questions you have." Gretel didn't look at it. "Forget about the rent of the laboratory, the cost of staff attendance is not up to you. If you want to balance the accounts, no, you can make me bankrupt." "How can I reconcile the accounts with you?" "Accountant? Where can I hire an independent accountant who can stand up to Parliament when I am unfamiliar with the place?" He only asked one question. Did Thunderhorn approve it? A smile flashed in old Sam's eyes. "This kid is quite interesting," he thought. "He is very clear about his status and strength. He will never give in to those who can't contend, and he will never give in to those who can resist or use his strength." He nodded slightly. "Thunderhorn endorses compensation package. Anyway, those who worked hard were the disciples and grandsons of that guy Carlyle. Those who filled in when there was a shortage of manpower were also the disciples of the teacher. The legendary mage uses his own people to work, and there is no need to give money. The so-called bearing 30% of the loss means that the labor costs and laboratory rent are left to the right. Thunderhorn has not paid a penny, and there is no need to even make an account. Ah, there are no more people to help carry the thunder, and we are really going bankrupt now." Greet lowered his head silently and took out the manuscripts he had stayed up late last night from the space bag, one by one, unfolding them like a fan. "I agree with the review committee's opinion. I agree with the compensation plan and amount. Now, let's talk about the authorization fees for plague prevention and control measures. Infectious diseases. Bacterial infectious diseases. Bacterial infectious disease prevention and control plan. Biological laboratory management regulations. Biological laboratory architectural drawings. Public health management regulations. Infectious disease reporting system. Infectious disease hospital planning plan. Come on. No knowledge is worthless. The rules of the Magic Council do not allow any magician, or anyone, to be forced to hand over their knowledge. These pieces of knowledge are intertwined. If you want to buy less of one thing, there will be an additional hole in the public health system." A group of half-old men looked at each other and laughed at the same time. After traveling in such a big circle, all they want is nothing more than this: it doesn't matter whether it's money or not, What's important is squeezing out knowledge. Of course, it's best to try your best to keep the price down, squeeze the guy's wallet clean, and let him only accept projects given by the council. Otherwise, if you miss it one day, it will cause a big fuss. They were smiling, and Greet was smiling confidently across from them. He took out the second page of each document, the summary, and organized it into a pile. He stood up on the spot and flashed his light to the judges. "Gentlemen, can I take it that the interrogation is over? If we enter the negotiation stage, should I be given corresponding status?" Negotiate, negotiate. Content is important, but momentum and posture are equally important. The upper limit of negotiation is not to lose a penny, and the lower limit of negotiation is never to go bankrupt. The great magician of the change department laughed. He waved gently and patted it on the long table. Magic light flashed, and the long table covered with red velvet tablecloth immediately widened and deformed, and together with the tablecloth, it became an elegant oval. Another ray of light fell behind Greet, and the thin and pitiful little armchair immediately turned into a beautiful high-backed armchair. Although compared to the gentlemen of the jury, the back of the chair is not carved or inlaid with gold, but generally speaking, the treatment is about the same. Greet was satisfied. He pushed the document forward and crossed his hands. "Gentlemen, please make an offer." The committee members exchanged glances with each other. They each lowered their heads and flipped through the summary at a glance. The member of the Department of Change was the first to speak. 100 contribution points per copy. There is no unique magic involved. 100 contribution points is already very high. 1,000 each. Gretel counter-offered without hesitation. Each of these documents is supported by an independent knowledge system. "Gentlemen, don't tell me you can't see it. 1,000 is too much." The phlogiston paper only awarded 1,000 contribution points. Well, comparing a chapter in infectious diseases with the discovery that laid the foundation of modern chemistry, the weight is indeed quite different. Greet felt slightly guilty, but did not lose his momentum at all. "But these documents are much broader." But. Negotiations quickly turned into meaningless haggling. Slapping the table, throwing documents, foaming at the mouth. Talking about an offer of 300 per copy and an offer of 700 per copy, the necromancer asked to read the full text. Greet also generously handed over the document. The committee members read it in exchange and made another offer. "These documents of yours are indeed very detailed, and there are many innovations. For the sake of detail, each document is worth 400 contribution points. 600. 500. No more points. 3,750. Total price. Make a deal." Both sides stood up and shook hands. The review committee breathed a sigh of relief, and Gretel also breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, no need to pay any more. Those regulations have also been handed over. Someone took care of the implementation for me. Oh yeah. He shook hands with the judges one by one. When he reached the last one, the great magician of the protection department flashed his eyes and suddenly asked, "Little Gretel, according to your document, laboratories that do not meet the standards and do not have adequate defenses cannot carry out plague research. That's for sure. So," a smile flashed across the eyes of the great magician, "would you like us to help with protection? You'll get a 20% discount." "What? 20% off? No, you want money? How much does it cost to receive high-level protective magic? The Magic Council has a public price, and the constant protection magic seems to be a sky-high price. Am I still going bankrupt?" Gretel did a quick mental calculation. Then, he took out his palm and pointed sternly at the document he had just handed over. "Let me make a statement. The authorization fee just agreed upon only includes the handover of documents. In other words, additional explanations, teachings, and improvements, including inspections of laboratory defense measures, are not included. Thanks to at Kingping's Highway for the 100 starting coins. 3,400 words. Another update completed. Little Greet is about to start a new journey. What's the next project? Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, please ask for all kinds of things. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 249. The judging panel was really tough. After another hour of bickering, both parties walked out of the conference room. Gretel touched the back of his neck, his palms were wet, and he was obviously sweating profusely. Of course, this intensity of negotiation or argument is still very fruitful. He got a laboratory, no, a mage tower. The Magic Council funded and helped him rebuild the P4 laboratory according to his request. The drawings Greet produced this time are for a 4-story laboratory including a sewage treatment layer, an operation layer, a pipeline layer and an air filtration layer. Moreover, since it has been determined that it will be built to the 4th level, and it will also come with magic defense and magic control, the review meeting will simply decide to build him a mage tower. As for the cost of building the energy pool of the mage tower itself and the tower spirit enlightenment outside the laboratory, we owe it first, and we are allowed to use the mage tower as a mortgage and pay in installments. And the Magic Council was not without gains. Within half a year, Gretel was obliged to explain the documents he delivered, teach and guide the personnel sent by the Magic Council, and train and assess them. Of course, the Parliament can send no more than 30 students. If the Parliament establishes a second P4 laboratory, Greet has the obligation and authority to conduct inspection and acceptance. If the inspection fails, the laboratory is not allowed to operate. The remuneration for the above work is included in the construction cost of the laboratory, no, the magic tower, and will not be paid separately. Selling an aircraft carrier for $1 billion, followed by subsequent modification, maintenance, personnel training, and weapons equipment, totaling $6 billion. The wisdom of fighting nations in previous lives is still useful. Greet crossed his arms happily and hummed softly. Started singing. Well, next, let's wait for them to release the drawings of the Mage Tower. This little guy is really tough to deal with. The two great magicians from the School of Protection and the School of Transformation smiled bitterly at each other. After the round of negotiations just now, they had a hard time, and they were also wet and sweating profusely. Gretel refused to give in, and even dared to slam the table in front of a group of great magicians like them, throwing out words one after another that he didn't understand. It sounds reasonable, but the consequences are terrible and shocking. Don't say that. The rabbit will bite when it's anxious. The one from the prophecy department smiled and shook his head, his eyes soft. The black-robed mage frowned. Isn't it bad for us to do this? Logically speaking, he should be rewarded for the incident in Glory City, but all of them are withheld like this. Are you stupid? Old Sam suddenly turned his head and glared at him. His eyes were sharp, and from the depths of his pupils, lightning and sparks were almost erupting. Little Gretel is a healer. A healer? Which healer can still be happy when he hears that hundreds of thousands of people died from the plague he created? How anxious and busy was he when the plague was leaked a few days ago? Didn't you see that? You're not trying to reward him, you're trying to kill him. Do you think he is your necromancer? I put this sentence here, even if he made these plague seeds, it was not to harm people, it was definitely to save people. Gretel, who was in order to save people, was respectfully invited to the mage tower next to him as soon as he left the Tower of Babel. Led by Archmage Edgar, the mentor of Master Lin and who he had dealt with before, a group of necromancers accompanied him inside. "Little Gretel, what should we do with the spy who escaped from your laboratory?" "Mr. Nordmark, the prophecy school has dealt with the spy, and we have taken out everything we should. What should we do next? Can I be summoned directly as a skeleton soldier? Or become a zombie?" The auxiliary tower in Black Crow Swamp is made in the shape of a pyramid, covering an area wider than the other towers, and the bottom is also particularly deep. The top is a straight pyramid, and the bottom is an inverted pyramid. Gretel was surrounded by the crowd and walked all the way down the sloping corridor, feeling quite like being buried in a tomb. Walking into the hinterland of the pyramid, taking the elevator down to more than 10 floors, we entered the tomb, or in other words, entered the special layer where corpses are preserved. The temperature on the entire floor was extremely low. Greet shuddered and immediately handed over a badge. Positive energy talisman. Every grid here is soaked with negative energy. You can't stop it with cold and heat resistance alone. You have to use this. The badge in his hand was a golden circle in the shape of a sundae. Gretel strongly suspected that it was stolen from the Church of Radiance. He put on the badge as instructed, felt warm all over, and breathed a sigh of relief involuntarily. Although at the same time, the necromancers next to them all took 2 steps away. Gretel followed the necromancers deep into the tomb. The tomb looked clean. There was nothing special about it except that the walls were not made of bricks and stones, but were made of dry thigh bones and skulls. The necromancer who led the way looked at him frequently, but Greet kept his expression unchanged and walked forward in stride. The spy who committed suicide was sealed in a giant piece of ice. Inside the ice, there was a slight gap in the part that was in contact with the corpse. It was definitely not a lie to say that the necromancer faction had taken out what needed to be taken out. Greet looked around the body, then looked around again, and finally let out a long breath. "Have you ever opened this ice coffin?" "No. Absolutely not," Archmage Edgar hurriedly assured. Behind him, 2 black-robed mages shook their heads frequently, almost becoming phantoms. Further back, 2 skeletons clicked and really shook their heads off. Gretel was relieved. God knows how many deadly bacteria were on this corpse. It would have been better if the ice coffin had been sealed, but it would have been fatal if it had not been sealed. He pondered for a moment. It's okay to make a skeleton soldier, but it's best not to use zombies. After all, there are too many pathogenic bacteria in the skin and muscles, which are easy to spread. The skeleton soldiers can also be soaked with disinfectant water. But he looked at Archmage Edgar expectantly. "Can you sell this body to me? I have cash. 100, no, 200 contribution points." Edgar. He heard about what happened at the judging panel. Gretel started haggling, which is called being careless, but which is called refusing to give in. But now, 200 contribution points are spent casually without batting an eye. You know, 200 contribution points is almost the annual income of a level 2 mage. The corpse of a level 7 thief, the official price is 500 contribution points, he answered flatly. Greet didn't even think about it. Deal. Corpse. It's been a while since I've done an anatomy. And it was a corpse infected with multiple infectious diseases. What's wrong with 500 contribution points? It's not like we can't afford it. Archmage Edgar originally wanted to say, if you give 2 lectures, we will waive the bill, but now he is too embarrassed to mention it. He moved out of the way, motioned to the 2 skeletons to move forward to move the ice coffin, and asked Gretel. "Are you doing the dissection here?" "Absolutely not. This needs to be dissected in my laboratory. Otherwise the plague will be leaked and it will be over." "Okay, I'll help you transport it there. Can you watch the dissection?" "Sure." Then, Gretel made the first cut with full confidence in front of the dissecting table in the laboratory. Can't cut it? I'm so tired, let's update the 2000 in the morning. Thanks to it doesn't matter if you read the book 100 times, and at Lofsway for the 500 starting coins reward. Thanks to Archangel Blazing for the reward of 200 starting coins. Double monthly pass from July 29 to August 4. During the double monthly pass period, crowdfunding rewards will be available from 2000 hours to 2400 hours every night. Please save your tickets and rewards for that time period. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 250. Greed held the scalpel and doubted life. Can't cut it? Can't cut it? Is this body too frozen? Should I wait a little longer until it thaws? Or should I add some heat, say, turn the microwave to defrost mode and turn it for 3 minutes? Or maybe the reason why I can't move is because I made a mistake in the procedure and didn't bow to the general teacher in advance. Never. Those are enemies, spies who sneak into the laboratory to cause damage, not the general teacher. Just like a certain medical school in the Northeast, the corpses used for dissection are all little devils of the past. The teachers and students of the school never bow to them. Still. He calmed down, held the handle of the knife between his thumb, middle finger, ring finger, and little finger, pressed his index finger on the back of the knife, made the tip of the knife at a right angle to the incision, and stabbed down with all his strength. This sword has been refined over time, using the surgeon's standard bow holding style. The posture, angle, and strength are all impeccable. The skin on the abdomen of the corpse sank slightly, but Gretel used his strength to the limit, but his resistance did not decrease, and he did not look like he was about to be penetrated. Alas, it is really difficult to cut when frozen. It's been a long time since I've tried this feeling. Since I started working, I've only cut living people, and I've never cut anyone's body again. Well, it has been soaked in the formalin pool for a long time. When the knife is cut, it feels really hard, just like old cowhide. Moreover, formalin smudges the eyes, and this ice coffin is thawed, so it still doesn't smell. But not being able to cut it off is ultimately a problem. Gretel was embarrassed for a long time and looked left and right. If it was any other strenuous work, even if it was carrying a thigh, repositioning bones, etc., it would be no problem to let Bernard do it, but dissection. Can such delicate work be left to him? If you leave it to him, it won't be an anatomy, but a big knife to chop the meat. Besides, dissection is a kind of work, but also a kind of enjoyment. This should never be left to others. He looked left and right. On the left and right, the necromancers all laughed, even though each of them was covered in protective clothing, with pitch-black leather robes and shiny beaks. There was laughter high and low under the beaks, which sounded particularly sinister. Under the pale shadowless light, Gretel shivered reflexively. How do I get them to wear this? Why don't I let them wear surgical gowns? If everyone wore surgical gowns, it wouldn't look so scary. Well, first of all, this is dissecting a corpse with infectious bacteria, and you must wear protective clothing. Second, there is no disposable protective clothing made of PE and PP fabric that was light and thin like in the previous life. What I am wearing now is also a pitch black leather jumpsuit. Archmage Edgar laughed and shook his head. Cutting up a corpse, but not being able to cut it. This kind of thing has happened to almost everyone in the young necromancer. Cleaning up animal carcasses, helping the teacher clean up the corpses of high-level enemies, traveling by myself, and luckily killing high-level enemies. Little Greet, he laughed as he came up with ideas. As he came up with ideas, he couldn't help but sneer. There's nothing I can do about it. Gretel's innocent and confused look is a bit similar to when Lynn first started. Coupled with the previous friendship between Lynn and Greet, Archmage Edgar always felt like he was seeing his own disciple when he looked at this young man. Little Greet, do you want to help? This corpse is really difficult to cut, he was a level 7 thief when he was alive. A level 7 thief, Gretel was immediately discouraged. He can't cut through a level 5 knight, let alone a level 7 knight. Even if the thief's defense is not as good as that of the knight, he is still a physics profession and his body is very strong. Is there any way? Greet immediately cast a look for help. The necromancers on the side laughed together and came up with ideas. Throw a corpse decay technique. It's best used when making skeleton soldiers. After the skin and flesh rot, the bones can be easily extracted. Gretel shook his head rapidly. Are you kidding me? I want to do an anatomy, not to extract bones. Don't I know how to cook the bones in a big pot? It cooks quickly under high temperature and pressure, and it can also kill bacteria. The orthopedics department next door is the best at it. Maybe the knife is not fast enough? How about adding a demonized weapon to your knife? Then it will be able to cut. What a great idea, why didn't I think of that? Gretel gave a thumbs up to the necromancer who spoke, raised the scalpel in one hand, and prepared to cast a spell with the other hand. It just so happens that demonized weapon is a level 1 spell. He has already learned it. It is not difficult to bless one by himself. Before he finished mobilizing the spell model, the blade of the scalpel shone brightly, but someone threw a magic spell at him. Greet turned around blankly, but couldn't tell who cast the spell, so Yoon nodded his thanks and returned his attention to the corpse. Well, it's much better this time, and I can barely move it. Gretel made a midline incision, and stabbed from the xiphoid process to the navel. The skin on the deceased's abdomen developed great resistance, and then suddenly decreased, but the tip of the knife had already penetrated the skin. Greet immediately tilted the blade at 45 degrees, dissected steadily, and cut backwards. Once, twice. Then, Gretel raised his palm and silently looked at the white mark on his index finger. No, it was still so hard that he almost couldn't help but use the saw. It is estimated that all the skin and superficial fascia were cut open, and his hand was also disabled. The little mage can't do it. My hands are so tender. I've never done rough work. At first glance, it seems that I haven't helped my mentor carry the body since he was an apprentice. The necromancers laughed. Greet turned his head and glared angrily. Who has not carried a corpse? Who has not carried it? When I was in medical school, it was all our job to pick the anatomy teacher out of the formalin pool. Helplessly, the angry eyes under the beak mask and glass lenses really don't have much power. The necromancers continued to laugh when they should, and after they finished laughing, they came to help him with advice. Otherwise, give me a barbarian bull power. Level 2 spells of the transformation system, I can't do it, can you? I can, but it can only last 7 minutes, little Greet, how long will it take you to dissect this corpse? Gretel looked at the body eagerly, even a little greedily. How long it takes? You should ask me how long I want to dissect. A whole corpse that belongs to you. You can do whatever you want. When they took the department analysis class before, a group of people shared the same part. For example, this class was about upper limbs, and a group of people dissected an upper limb. From skin and muscles to blood vessels, nerves, bones, superficial structures, deep structures, shoulders, arms, elbows, wrists and hands. Everyone is responsible for their own part, and every cut must be accurate, although in fact it is often impossible to do so. Every part and every layer must be clear. An hour and a half of an anatomy class passed in a flash. I never had this opportunity during school. After work, the subjects of dissection or surgery were all living people. What I wanted was to sew and cure them quickly, rather than taking a chance to do a good dissection and become familiar with the structure of the human body. Ask him how long it will take to dissect this corpse? I estimate that even 1 or 2 days may not be enough. Well, I'm afraid it won't work to add magic like this. Well, let me think of other ways. The necromancer who spoke squatted back and thought about it. Archmage Edgar laughed. Little Gretel, how about I lend you a skeleton? He waved his hand. A ray of white light fell on the ground, rising higher and higher, unfolding into a brilliant silver skull. Archmage Edgar raised his hand and pointed. Here, give it a try. Imprint it with your own spirit, control it, and drive it. Although the silver skeleton is not as powerful as the gold skeleton, it consumes less. Do some fine work and cut a warrior below level 10. It is ready. Gretel. What, a silver skull? I remember that Lin brought a gold skeleton with him, and Archmage Edgar himself brought a dark gold skeleton, so your skeletons are arranged according to the levels of silver, gold, dark gold? Are there bronze skeletons down there, and further up, are there mithril and fine gold skeletons? He suppressed his rants and looked at Archmage Edgar inquiringly. The Archmage smiled and nodded to him. Gretel thought for a moment, then bowed slightly to him gratefully, and then followed his instructions and explored his spiritual power. The silver skeleton stood motionless, as if it were a dead thing, or rather, it was a dead thing in the first place. Gretel's mental power covered it, and he felt slightly dizzy. His vision, hearing, and touch were suddenly divided into two unrelated ends. Gretel? What is rhythm? This silver skeleton can have sensory feedback. Doesn't it all depend on me using my mental power to pull the thread and move it? Regardless, having feedback makes it easier to operate. Greed controlled the silver skeleton to take one step and then another. His vision kept shaking, and he was so dizzy that he could only close his eyes. Archmage Edgar smiled and praised. The mental strength is very good. As soon as you get started, you can make it move. Hey, don't worry, just let it walk around a circle first, and then walk around again to get used to the feeling of having another you. Let me tell you, this silver skull is different from the gold skull. The gold skeleton is intelligent and can work on its own, while the silver skeleton is like the mage's other self. The mage has to work hard to control it, but it can help a lot. He rambled on and praised him, and Gretel adjusted to it for a while, then suddenly opened his eyes. Raising his hand, the silver skeleton walked over steadily and took the scalpel from his hand. Lower your head, put the tip of the knife against the xiphoid process, make the tip of the knife at a right angle to the skin, and stab it out. The power of feedback from the hand is stable and accurate. Pushing down slightly, the feeling of the tip of the knife piercing the skin immediately came. It was obvious that the power of the silver skull was much greater than that of Gretel. Gretel immediately controlled the skeleton to change gestures. The blade of the knife was tilted at 45 degrees, and it was cut downward steadily and silently. The skin of the corpse had been split, and it was cut from the lower part of the xiphoid process to the outside of the umbilicus, and then to the upper edge of the pubic symphysis. It felt silky and smooth under the knife, and the touch feedback to Greet was not much different from the feeling he had when operating on a living person in his previous life. It can be cut? Had surgery. I can still feel it in my hands. Gretel almost burst into tears. He casually handed over a pair of tissue tweezers. The silver skull tissue tweezers in his left hand clamped a corner of the skin flap, and the scalpel in his right hand was close to the space between the dermis and subcutaneous tissue, moving silently. The connective tissue is severed and the skin flap is lifted to expose the underlying subcutaneous tissue. The smooth cooperation of his hands and the even strength were almost as if he was performing surgery with his own hands. Well, it might be a little better than dissecting it by himself. After all, he himself is not that strong. The only bad thing is that his body seems to have become an assistant. Well, Isaac couldn't even pull his turn, he couldn't even pull the hook, it was all done with the enhanced version of the mage's hand. After being promoted to a level 2 mage, Gretel learned the enhanced version of the mage's hand, with a pulling force of 40 pound. If one mage's hand can't pull it, you can use another one to ensure that it can be pulled firmly and steadily. You can change the angle however you want. The surgeon would never talk about it for a long time, but he still didn't know whether to raise or lower it. Nor would the surgeon use a hemostat to hit his wrist because his hands were shaking due to poor exertion. Hey, there's no point in smashing yourself. So in the end, I was reduced to a device nurse. Gretel muttered to himself in a fit of laughter and tears. But no matter what, the appearance of the silver skeleton still solved Gretel's big problem. He nodded gratefully to Archmage Edgar and asked in a low voice. Then, let me do an autopsy and take a look. Do it, Archmage Edgar waved his hand vigorously. When Greet went to pick up the instrument tray, he hurried over and lowered his voice. Pay attention to the consumption of mental energy. It takes a lot of mental energy to control this skeleton. It's your first time using it, so don't overdo it. Greet promised in a low voice. He put down the instrument tray at the feet of the corpse, thought for a moment, and moved to the opposite side of the silver skull. Well, anyway, the mage's hands don't take up any space. He stands in a supporting position, which is convenient for handing things and checking the condition of the abdominal cavity. With a knife in his hand, or in other words, a silver skull knife in his hand, Gretel immediately became energetic. Seeing that the necromancers were surrounding them, looking around 1 meter away, he looked around and said loudly. The purpose of our dissection of this corpse today is to explore the impact of various pathogenic bacteria carried by the deceased on human tissues and organs. First, let's observe the whole body. Look, there is a large ulcer on the right leg, swelling and pus. This is most likely an infection by Staphylococcus aureus and Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Let's take a sample first, Among the large areas of what should have been red, swollen, and pus-filled ulcers, there lay quietly a piece of charred black flesh, with bone ulcers clearly visible. The deceased was extremely ill. This ulcer cannot be caused by any of the germs I have created. Gretel silently dipped a cotton swab into it, sealed it, cut out a piece of ulcerated tissue, and sealed it. Archmage Edgar came over to take a look, nodded and said. The touch of the corpse. It's the magic of the necromancy school. I remember that when they intercepted the spy ship before, they once hit a spy who jumped into the sea. It should be this person. Is it magic damage that I have never seen before? Keep a little more of this. Greet's men used more force, or rather, they made the silver skeleton's men use more force, cutting off more and more large pieces of tissue, including a piece of the surrounding muscles, tendons, and bones. After sealing the samples, another topic came up. Please note that when incising the skin, pay attention to the depth and only cut to the dermal layer, so as to avoid damaging the underlying fascia, blood vessels, and nerves. The skin thickness varies in various parts of the human body. Usually the skin on the flexor side of the limbs is thinner and the skin on the extensor side is thicker, but the opposite is true for the skin on the hands and feet. The skin on the palms, soles of the feet, neck, back, and shoulders is the thickest, and the eyelids are the thinnest. When operating the knife, be careful to control the depth. Necromancers, why? What are you talking about? We don't use the knife on living people. Why? Gretel smiled brightly. Of course it's because the less damage it causes, the easier it will be for the patient to recover. Okay, he is indeed a healer, not a natural necromancer. 4,200 words, another update completed. Double monthly pass from July 29th to August 4th. Please save your tickets and rewards for that time period. Please subscribe, ask for recommendation votes, and ask for book reviews.